Hey Indians, this is Jeremy Fuel, Superintendent here at Mississinewa Community Schools. Last night on January 13th at 5 o'clock, we had a public work session with the Mississinewa Community School Board members. Along with that meeting, we had several of our financial team as well as our architects and project managers for upcoming projects that are going to be going on. We attempted to record the presentation last night, but after about 5 minutes, the recording stopped. So what I am doing is re-recording that presentation, presenting the information that was presented last night so that the community is aware of that. Our hopes was that we would be able to share that recording out to the public just to make them aware. I won't do nearly as good of a job as what our groups from Stiefel, Policy Analytics, Baker Tilly, and Ice Miller did presenting last night, but I do want our community to be aware of that information. First of all, who was in attendance last night to present information? We had Luke Bruggeman from Stiefel was presenting. We had Barry Gardner from Policy Analytics. We had Eric Long from Ice Miller, Belvia Gray from Baker Tilly, Matt Eckerly, who is also with Baker Tilly, presented on TIF information. He doesn't work directly with the school district, but does work with the city of Gas City in regards to TIF districts, which does impact the school district's funding. We also had Mike Roberts, who's the president of Tecton, who is our construction manager advisor with future projects that are going to be going on within the district. We also had from Oak Park, which is our architectural firm, we had Jeremy Ogle, Kevin Runkle, and Scott Moak all in attendance last night presenting information as well. So we're going to go through the presentation, or I'm going to take you through this presentation and kind of summarize what was discussed last night. The meeting last night lasted approximately an hour and 10, hour and 15 minutes. It won't take me that long to go through this information because there were some questions and answers from the board with our financial advisors last night, just clarifying some information. But I'll do my best to take you through all this information. And as always, if there are any questions whatsoever, once you watch this presentation, I would encourage you to reach out and talk to me, and I can clarify them further. So this was the agenda that we worked through last night. So first item we talked about was really property tax analysis and AV projections. That was provided by Policy Analytics, who we are working with just to look at our current financial status within the district and then projections going out over the next 5+ years. Second one is considerations for debt financing and potential referendums. That was kind of combined with Policy Analytics, Stiefel, and Baker Tilly's presentation. Third item was TIF timelines and impact to Mississinewa Community Schools. Matt Eckerly, again, who doesn't work directly with the district from Baker Tilly, works more with Gas City on the TIFs, was present to be able to present some of that information. TIFs can be very confusing for a lot of people, and even for the school district, it can be hard to wrap our heads around. So it was good to have Matt there to explain some of that stuff to our entire team. Next item we talked about was potential financing scenarios within the upcoming building projects and how we do that and what is the least impactful to our homeowners within Mississinewa Community Schools. And then next we talked about tax impact and circuit breaker loss analysis. And lastly, Ice Miller talked about the legal and financing timelines. And Ice Miller is our bond counsel that provides all that legal framework for us. So this is our school district's financial team, so to speak, and each one of these companies plays a different role in planning things out. First is Baker Tilly. They're our municipal advisor, and I'm not going to read through all this. You guys can read it all on your own as well, a little bit more in depth. But Baker Tilly is our municipal advisor. They kind of guide us when we're looking at debt issuances. They also work with the city as well. So we have Belvia Gray, who we work with from the school side. The city has Matt Eckerly from Baker Tilly that they work with. Stiefel, they're our underwriter, so at the end of, they also kind of tie in and work directly with Baker Tilly as well. They look at their ultimate role in this is the underwriting and financing with the purchase of bonds for the corporation to sell them to investors. But they do a lot of projection and analysis for the districts as well. Policy Analytics, we started contracting with them this school year to really provide an in-depth property tax analysis, especially when we're looking at circuit breaker loss, and TIF as well. And so they're able to take that data from Mississinewa community schools and then compare it to all the districts within Grant County, and then also throughout the state, and be able to compare us to similar sized schools throughout the state as well, to show where we're at with state average, as well as where we're at with some of the schools within all the schools within Grant County. Ice Miller, they're our bond counsel, so they provide all the legal recommendations when we're going through any financing. They provide the timetables. There's very strict laws that we have to adhere to, and Eric Long from Ice Miller is our bond counsel for any bonds that we issue. Okay, so this slide here shows Mississinewa schools tax districts and rates. And we're comprised of 4 taxing districts, the school corporation is. 3 of the taxing districts are incorporated by cities or towns. 1 is an unincorporated area. The unincorporated taxing district comprises approximately 25.9% of the school's tax base. The remaining 3 incorporated areas comprise the remaining 74.1%. The property taxes, total taxes, range from $2.68 as the low to $5 and about 2 cents for the high. Now that's the total tax rate that includes the school's tax rate in those districts, but as well as township, municipal, library, and such for those other districts. So that's the total encompassing tax rates for those districts. An important thing to note on this, which impacts our school district, is anytime a total tax rate hits above $2, the school is going to see circuit breaker loss due to property tax caps. And so that's something that does hit us pretty hard at Mississinewa Community Schools, is that property tax cap and the circuit breaker loss. You look at 2024, I believe we're a little over $300,000 of revenue that we do not receive due to that circuit breaker loss. Okay, so this slide, the pie charts here show composition of gross assessed value by property class. So it breaks down our properties to show what percentage we have as residential, apartments, commercial, industry, agricultural, and personal property. What you'll notice here is, looking at the 2024 AV paid for 2025, is that residential is almost 74%. So we are a very, very high residential district. And when talking to our financial team, that is much higher than what they would like to see. And the reason for that is due to property tax caps. You have the 1%, 2%, and 3% property tax caps. So residential is capped at 1%, agricultural and rental is capped at 2%, and personal property and commercial is capped at 3%. And so a breakdown of those would be, okay, if the average home within our district, which it is, the average home is valued at $128,000, that is capped at the most that you can generate in terms of a tax revenue at 1%, which is $1,280. And then if you shift over to ag and rental, same thing, they're capped at 2% of that total. And then when you shift to personal property or commercial, that's at 3%. Now, personal property, what is that? That's the belongings inside of a commercial building. So that personal property inside of those industrial buildings that add value to that property, and those are capped at 3%. With us being primarily a residential district and not having a lot of the agricultural or commercial or personal property, we are hit harder with the 1% caps, which is what attributes to that circuit breaker loss that the district sees, which directly impacts our operations budget on a year-to-year basis. So this slide goes through Homestead gross assessed value history. And so when you're looking at gross assessed value history, it trends with the market trend. So in recent years, you have seen housing prices increase for the sale of homes. Well, the assessed valuation for those homes is going to trend just like the market would trend, not to the dollar for dollar amount. So if a house sells for $250,000, it's not going to be assessed at $250,000 per se. So typically the assessed valuation is going to be much less than the market value of the house. But what this graph shows is just kind of that gross assessed value, that Homestead gross assessed value trends. And what you'll see there is those values are in the thousands. That 128 there on the last column is 128,000. That is the median home value in our district. And then you can see the upper 75 75th percentile is right at 168,000, and then the 25th percentile is right at 100,000. And again, that factors into that property tax cap. Again, and then also we have to factor in any homestead exemptions that are provided in that as well. Okay, so this slide was put together from Barry Gardner at Policy Analytics. He took our net assessed value per student and then analyzed it and compared it to the state average, as well as similar districts across the state that have the same ADM or student enrollment that we have. So you look at ours at $135,000 of net assessed value per student. The state average is $454 or $454,000 per student. And you kind of go down the line, and those districts there are similar in student enrollment as what we are. And you go down that line all the way to the far left, it shows you MSD of Steuben County, 775,000. You work your way across Twin Lakes at 649,000, West Lafayette, 571,000, Madison Consolidated, 507,000, West Noble, 353,000. So all those different districts comparing. And what that does is that impacts our tax rate. So the lower assessed value that we have to pull from, the higher of a tax rate that we have to have within the district to generate enough of a tax levy in order to run our operations fund as well as our debt service fund. The operations fund, if you watch some previous presentations that I've done on public school financing, the ops fund pays for day-to-day running of the building. So buses, fuel, electricity for the buildings. There are some staffing that's paid out of that as well. Non-educational staffing is paid out of that. So just the day-to-day running of the building is paid out of the operations budget. Then also factored into that with that net assessed value is what we generate for our debt service fund, which pays for any sort of construction dollars for projects, whether it's a $2 million GO bond or $10 or $20 million bond issuance to do a bigger project for the district. And so you'll see in future slides how this impacts the school and their tax rates. Okay, so the previous slide showed the net assessed value per student, and what you'll see is we were on the far right on the previous slide because we had the lowest assessed value per student. This graph shows the tax rate and shows that inverse relationship between tax rate and assessed value. So this is 2024 school property tax rates compared to schools with a similar ADM or student enrollment, also compared to the state average. So since we have a lower assessed value per student, we have a higher tax rate. Our tax rate's right at around $1.48 between the operations fund, which is at 78 cents per $100 of assessed valuation, and then the 70 cents, which is our debt service rate per $100 of assessed valuation. Crawfordsville, you can see, is higher than us. They do have a capital referendum of 39 cents there that drives their rate up to $1.75 total. But as you look through that state average, I think was 454,000 per student for net assessed value. Well, total tax rate's 96 cents for the state average, and you can work your way down the line. So you see how that chart has flipped from the previous one. So the lower your assessed value, the higher your tax rate. The higher your assessed value, the lower your tax rate. Another thing to factor into this within our district is, and we'll talk a little bit more about this here in a little bit, but it is TIF districts. So within Mississinewa Community Schools, the city's done a great job of utilizing TIF to bring industry in. Out by 69, you have several TIF areas out there. We have 2 residential TIFs that are going in. All in all, that totals about $59 million of assessed valuation that the school district does not receive any tax levy due to the TIF. Now, the city does that because without having that TIF district in there, they're not able to bring that industry in or bring those additional developers in for housing. So, but it does put some constraints on the school district at the same point in time, and we have to educate our community about those constraints and how it does impact our day-to-day budget and annual budget for the district. Okay, so this slide is very similar to two slides ago, where we talked about the net assessed value per student, but this is isolated between state average and Grant County. So again, we saw earlier that state average was $454,000 of net assessed value per student, compared to Mississinewa Community Schools is $135,000 of net assessed value per student. And then you see the schools within Grant County. Marion's at $349,000, Eastbrook's at $310,000, Madison Grant's at $295,000, and Oak Hill's at $262,000. So what this shows you is within Grant County, we again are the lowest assessed value per student in the county, as well as one of the lowest in the entire state as well. And so that impacts our tax rate, that impacts the tax levy that we're able to generate, especially when you start to factor in circuit breaker loss in our TIF districts as well. Okay, so this slide is again similar to the one 2 slides ago as well. This just takes the net assessed value. Okay, now we're going to look at the inverse of that, which is the property tax rates within Grant County, as well as the state average. So we talked earlier a couple slides ago that the state average was 96 cents of tax rate per $100 of assessed valuation. That's the state average. Mississinewa Community Schools is at $1.48. And that's because of our low assessed value of $135,000 per student. And then you work your way down the line. You'll see that this chart is just the inverse of the previous chart, comparing the AV or net assessed value compared to property tax. And that chart again just flips left to right due to that. And so you can work your way down the line. Oak Hill's at $1.32, Marion's at $1.06, state average 96. Madison Grant is at 91 cents and Eastbrook's at 87 cents. And you might say, okay, what factors into that AV? Well, one thing for some of those districts, especially looking at Madison Grant and Eastbrook, is the agricultural ground. So that again, the agricultural ground is going to increase that AV significantly for those districts, which allows that they don't have that circuit breaker loss as much, and then they have a greater increase in their AV as well. Marion, you may ask, okay, well, they don't have agriculture, but what do they have? Well, they have a lot more industry than what we have. So again, that helps them out in terms of that AV projection right there. Okay, so this slide talks through net assessed value projections, but it also shows what our certified net assessed value was from 2015 up to current date, and then you see the dark green is projections for what the increase to our property tax values within the district are going to be. Again, it goes from 2015 up to 2024. That's the certified net assessed value projections. You see in recent years, we've seen some pretty significant growths, which has been good for the district. We want to see those growths, but we saw 13% in 2023. 2024, it was actually 14.4%. But because of House Bill 1499, the changes that they made with supplemental deductions on homes, we only saw 10% of that. So we didn't see the full 14.4%. And then going forward, what you'll see with that is for 25 being projected at 10.6%, that we're going to recoup a small percentage of that. We'll get about 2.1% for a total of 12.7%. And then the same thing for 26. If we're projected at 3.3%, we're going to realize a little bit of that growth back with a 5.4%. So they're going to get us some of that assessed value back, but that was largely due to House Bill 1499 that was passed in 2024. Okay, again, Barry Gardner from Policy Analytics put this slide together for us and talks about the marginal impact of a dollar levy change for the school district. So when we see, and this is talking specifically about our debt service fund levy. So we have our debt service fund levy, and then we have our operations fund levy. So when looking at debt service, when we see a dollar levy adjustment, up or down, either way, what we see from that is we see an increase to the school net levy of 75 cents. But due to circuit breaker loss, we lose 25 cents. We have to fund that through our operations fund budget. And when you look at, okay, what's made up of that total dollar increase or decrease of tax levy? First is 25 cents or 25% is circuit breaker increase to the operations fund. That's money that we have to generate and be able to come up with to overcome that circuit breaker loss. And then 34 is reallocated from other taxing units, so 34 cents or 34% is from other taxing units. And then the increased liability on taxpayers is 42 cents. So taxpayers, from a dollar increase or decrease to our tax levy, the homeowner or taxpayer is 42 cents or 42%. So this breaks down and really shows just on a dollar incremental basis what that increase or decrease and how those funds are generated from the different taxing units. So last night during our work session, Luke Bruggeman from Stiefel put this slide together, and this was a big talking point and discussable item for our financial team as well as our school board and administrative staff at the meeting. So first thing, I'll spend a little bit of time on this slide. There's a lot of information here to be able to go through. First is talking about exempt versus non-exempt debt. All of Mississinewa Community Schools' current debt was not passed via referendum, and therefore that is a non-exempt debt, which is subject to a circuit breaker tax credit. So we talked about circuit breaker loss for the district previously on those 1%, 2%, and 3% caps. 1% residential, 2% for agricultural and rental, and then 3% for industry, commercial, and personal property. With that circuit breaker loss, in 2024, Mississinewa Community Schools saw a loss of over $300,000 due to circuit breaker. When we track that data back to 2016, from 2016 to present date, it's around $3.2 million of lost revenue to the district due to property tax caps or circuit breaker loss. When we look at borrowing from different funds, that has a vastly different impact on a taxpayer's bill. So whether something's done through exempt process or non-exempt, we have to factor that in and decide what's best for the district, but also take into consideration what's best for our tax-paying base. And then another layer to that is what's best for the community, because we're factoring in all the taxing municipalities, Gas City, all the townships as well, and come together on that to come with the best plan for all those different individuals, and primarily our taxpayers ultimately. When looking at property tax caps and impacts, that property tax cap or circuit breaker loss, we have to absorb that in our operations fund. And again, the operations fund pays for day-to-day running of the building, salaries for custodians, cafeteria workers, a lot of our central office staff and such. Debts that's passed via referendums are not subject to property tax caps. So if you think about that TIF districts within our school community, that $59 million, we don't receive any tax levy from that $59 million of AV. However, if we did a referendum, they would have to then pay a tax levy to the school district, which will allow us to be able to recoup some money from those TIF areas, and then also be able to receive some money beyond what we're losing with circuit breaker or property tax caps. There's that number. And so in 2024, Mississinewa Community Schools lost $307,210 in our operations fund due to property tax caps. Looking at a project thresholds, a school corporation that has a non-exempt debt service rate between 40 and 80 cents will be subject to additional taxpayer process on all projects. So there's a legal step that we have to do with public hearings, advertising of projects and such, if we're above 40 cents and less than 80 cents. If a school, and now that doesn't factor in anything referendum wise, if a school corporation has a non-exempt tax rate over 80 cents, and that's a non-exempt debt service tax rate, doesn't factor in the operations fund, but a non-exempt debt service rate over 80 cents, then all borrowings must go to referendum at that point in time. We are currently right at that 70, almost 71 cents. So we're approaching that threshold where no matter what we would do, whether it was buying a bus for $200,000 or doing a $100 million building project, once you hit 80 cents, no matter what that project is, we would have to go to the community for a referendum at that point in time. So we have to be very, very mindful of that debt service tax rate, because if we get in a pinch and we have to replace a roof, we don't want to have to go through the long legal timeline that there is with a referendum and risk the potential for it not to pass and not be able to replace a roof or a chiller or any HVAC equipment or buy a bus if we need to, just for day-to-day operational purposes. Now, going down to looking at future borrowing capacity, our current debt that we have extends through 2038, with payments decreasing from 2.6 million to approximately 560,000 in 2030. So that's 2.6 million in today to 560,000 in 2030. All existing debt currently would be paid in full in 2038. And this is just something to educate the community on. They're saying that you think about it from a personal standpoint. You're working to pay off your mortgage as quickly as possible. Schools will never be debt free. We just can't function that way in terms of keeping up with our facilities. We're dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars of facilities, and so you constantly have to reissue debt to keep that tax rate as consistent as possible and be able to maintain your buildings. For us specifically, if Mississinewa Community Schools issues the full $26 million, the school corporation will use all of our borrowing capacity at that existing 71 cent debt service tax rate, barring any growth changes in net assessed value or other material changes. So Stiefel, when they project things, they project very conservatively. They're going to project at a lower rate than of growth within our net assessed value than what Policy Analytics will do. They have to, in terms of when they're selling bonds for the district. So they're going to project down in the 1% to 2% growth range, and then 0% when it's 3, 4, 5, 10 years out, just because they don't know what the market's going to do specifically. Policy Analytics, they will take a little bit more, I want to say aggressive, but I would say more of a realistic approach, gauging that at around the 4 to 6% growth range there. What we have to factor in with that is so what this tells us is we know that we have $26 million of bonding capacity over the next several years that we can use. Now, we also know that $26 million is not going to meet all of our needs within the school corporation. We have needs in every single building. RJ Basket is a big concern, and really a recommendation from a superintendent standpoint is with that building being 75 plus years old, I can't make a recommendation to the board or to the taxpaying community that we spend a lot of money on that building. It's just not a smart taxpayer recommendation or taxpayer decision. So when I look at that 26 million, what can that do for us? And we're going to talk about this more in future meetings and presentations. Really, that 26 million can target both of our elementary schools and do some major renovations and expansions there that are needed, and do a little bit of work at the high school. But beyond that, that's about all we can do with that. Anything major at the high school or RJ Basket is beyond that $26 million of bonding capacity. Additional borrowings could result in a tax rate increase to the non-exempt debt service fund, which is a potential impact on circuit breaker loss and therefore the school's operations fund. So referendum considerations. Okay, if we want to do more to our facilities, we have to look at potentially a capital referendum, which goes directly to facilities. So we know that 26 million can target both of our elementaries, but really can't do anything for RJ Basket or the high school. So to do more to those buildings, we have to talk to the taxpaying community and say, hey, if this is a priority, if we want to invest in our school system and invest in our students and invest in our staff and invest in ultimately the community, which it is an investment, because people are going to move to a community when the school systems are safe, secure, and up to 2025 standards. So we have to look at a capital referendum for those projects. The other thing that we have to look at is, and we'll talk about on the next slide, is looking at our projections over the next 5 to 10 years due to circuit breaker loss, impacts from TIF, and just education funding from the state and federal government. We are not going to be able to sustain financially what we're currently doing without looking potentially at an operating referendum. So operating referendum is a completely different referendum from a capital referendum. An operating referendum would supplement the operations fund, where we are seeing that $3.2 million of loss due to circuit breaker and property tax caps from 2016. And so those are items that we have to look at. And maybe it's a combination of looking at, an operating referendum to supplement that, and maybe we have to look at trimming our budget down. That means looking at staffing. Do we have to reduce staffing in certain areas? Where can we reduce cost? Because we need our revenue to meet our expenditures. And right now we're not going to see that. 2025, we're going to see a loss of about $800,000 from revenue to expenditure. So we have about $800,000 deficit that we have to work with and work on. And when we talk about our cash balance, you're going to see in the next slide why we have to factor that in. We can't wait until it's too late. We have to be proactive about that. And so those two statements or questions there underneath operating considerations is, how will the school district address long-term financial stability and any potential shortfall in future years? How does an operating referendum tax rate impact the tax rate needed for potential capital projects in the district? So those are considerations that we, as a district and as a school board, and even with the community's input, we're going to be looking at going forward. Okay, again, this slide was put together from Barry Gardner at Policy Analytics, just showing ending cash balance projections. And it goes back to 2020 and shows the actual through 2024 of actual cash balances within education operations and rainy day funds. And then it shows what those projections are based upon expected revenue versus expected expenditures. Where you see we're at right now is around $7.7 million cash balance, which is really good between our education operations and rainy day fund. As you project out and looking into 2026, 2027, 2028, what you see is we do have a deficit, and that's what we are battling due to limited education fund dollars from the state and federal government, due to circuit breaker loss that directly impacts our operations budget, and due to a low AV that we have here in the district, which decreases our levy that we have, tax levy, to generate revenue. So what we have to look at from a district standpoint is on average around $800,000 to $1.2 million deficit. Well, schools are limited on how to generate revenue. We can't stipulate the funds that we get from the state or federal government. That is what it is. We can try to increase student enrollment, but when you increase student enrollment, you have to have the staffing in place, which is an added expenditure, which we've done. We're pretty well at max capacity, so we're generating really good funds into the education fund. But when you look at that circuit breaker loss, property tax caps, low AV, we have to look at operating referendums as a way to sustain what we're currently doing from a financial standpoint. Now, as a district, and we're in this process, is internally looking at cash flow in terms of those expenditures. And that's staffing, that's programming, that's use of materials, etc. We are doing a hard dive into that to see where we can scale things back, what we can absorb, what we can't absorb. But we are limited on what we can absorb, especially from a staffing standpoint, because we do have students that have a high need, that need that the staff there to be able to support them, not just educationally, but emotionally, socially, etc. And we have a lot of great programs here at the district, and you'll see that based upon us consistently ranking in the top 10 in the state in student transfers. We're always in the top 5 or 10 in the state. We have more students that choose to come to Mississinewa than we lose by far, and we're by far one of the best in the state at that. And that's because of the programming that we put in place. Now, back to just that cash flow, those are things that we have to look at. And that's why we are looking at, you're going to hear us talking about a potential operating referendum to increase that revenue so that we don't have to go through the process of cutting staffing or programming to a significant basis to make up for that roughly $1 million deficit over the next several years. So these projections show that by 2031 we would be out of our cash balance, and we cannot operate that way. We want to do what's best for students. We're not a bank. We don't need to stockpile a lot of money or anything like that, but we do have to maintain being in the black in terms of our funding. We cannot be in the red and lose money. We can't operate in a negative balance. DLGF will not allow us to do that. And so we have to make some adjustments going along in the future. So this slide shows that and shows those cash projections there. We want to be able to attract and retain. That's part of our strategic plan, is to attract and retain highly qualified staff. Well, in order to do that, we have to compensate them better than a lot of our counterparts within the county, surrounding areas, our athletic conference. And so we don't want to go away from that. So we have to look to make some adjustments along the way. So this slide really shows that and lays that out there. Open to any feedback from the community on these cash flow projections, but we have to be proactive and not reactive to cash flow projections. Okay, before I dive into this slide, we didn't have a slide from Matt Eckerly from Baker Tilly. There really wasn't stuff to put on a slide, but he did spend some time last night talking to the school board about TIF districts, tax incremental financing. Again, I mentioned earlier that within Mississinewa Community Schools, there's about $59 million of assessed valuation. When you think about McDonald's, Walmart, and some of that industry out there by 69, that's a TIF area for us. We also have residential TIFs that are going in. There's not a lot of AV on those residential TIFs at this point in time because they haven't been fully developed. But there is about $59 million. So when you look at $59 million based upon a $1.48 tax rate, that's about $874,000 of revenue that the school district does not see. And so that factors into this as well. Now, with that $59 million, what we're going to see is as those TIFs expire, which they're set to expire, we have them set to expire 27, 2030, and then 2035, which that hitting our AV, our assessed valuation, in 2028, 2031, and 2036. What that does do for the district is that resets that base AV to the current, what that current amount would be, what that current assessed value. So you think about Walmart, when Walmart TIF rolls off and it gets reissued, if it's grown $40 million, we will get $40 million added to our base assessed value. And we would realize that AV increase in terms of our tax levy. So what that creates is natural debt cliffs for us to be able to issue smaller bonds in the future in terms of maintenance projects, roofing, buses, HVAC projects, some of those smaller projects like that. It does not give us the capacity to be able to do a large-scale building project, though. But it does give us those maintenance capacities going forward. So that's one thing to realize within the TIFs. That's something that Matt Eckerly went through. Again, he's from Baker Tilly, represents the city with the TIF districts. This slide right here, we'll get into this, really running through two different analysis or potential projects for the district. We started off with approximately 12 financial scenarios, working with our financial team over the last 6 months, really trying to dig into what is best for the district, what is best for our taxpayers, what's best for our students, what's best for our staff, what's best for the city of Gas City and all the individual townships, what's best for Jonesboro, all those tax-paying districts within Mississinewa Community Schools. We narrowed that down to 6 potential scenarios. The top one, what you will see is a $113 million project, and that's there in the blue. And on the bottom, you'll see an $85 million project. Everything that we are going to be putting out is going to be related to a total of a $113 million project. So first scenario that you'll see there, scenario 1 underneath the blue, under 113 million, is looking at a total project of 113 million, all referendum based. What this does, and there's pros and cons to every single scenario. So the advantages for that one is it reduces circuit breaker loss for the district, which increases our levy, leaves capacity within the non-exempt debt service rate. So when I talked about that $26 million of bonding capacity, that's saying, okay, we're not going to use part of that $26 million in this $113 million project. So that leaves, that could allow the debt service rate to drop, or we could reutilize that $26 million for something else. The disadvantage for this is by doing $113 million of all referendum, that's the highest referendum tax rate at $2.14, and it's the most impactful to homeowners in terms of a tax levy for them. Dropping down to the scenario 2, we have 113 million split between referendum and no referendum. So what that means is we're going to take that 26 million and we're going to use it as part of that $113 million total project. We already know what that $26 million is used for. It's mainly the elementary schools at this point in time. We would then ask for an $87 million referendum to really look at what we're going to do at RJ Basket with our preschool, what we're going to do with looking at moving 6th, 7th, and 8th to the high school, what we're going to do with renovations to the high school. Advantage of this one is it's less impactful to homeowners than the scenario 1. $26 million project can be done without a vote if there is no petition, but the $87 million would have to be taken to vote. Disadvantages with this scenario is that it's a higher tax rate than scenario 3, which we're going to go through here in a second, and then it also leaves us no borrowing capacity in our non-exempt fund, non-exempt debt service fund, due to that current rate. We would have about a 9-cent buffer to go up to that 80-cent debt service rate, but it's a very limited one by reissuing that 26 million. We look at scenario 3. When we look at this entire project, we know what we're looking at right now is going to take about 5 years. So being strategic about that, we don't need to borrow that entire 87 million or that entire 113 million out at one time and pay interest on that money. So we're looking at scenarios or a scenario where we have multiple series or issuances of that 87 million. We would take out the 26 million and focus it out on the 2 elementary schools. The 87 million would be spread out over the course of about 5 years because it would take us a total of 5 years to complete all the required projects and shifting around of staff and students within these projects. What that does is, the advantage of this one is least amount of increase to homeowners. $26 million, again, can be done without a vote if there's no petition. Disadvantages, does the construction timeline support this? That's a question mark. No borrowing capacity in non-exempt debt service fund at current rate. So in terms of the question about does construction timing support this, the answer is yes. The construction timing does support this scenario. In terms of no borrowing capacity, there is borrowing capacity, but it's limited borrowing capacity. We would still maintain that debt service rate of about 70 to 71 cents. If something major happened where we're unexpected with a roof or HVAC equipment going out, we would have about a 9-cent buffer to work with in terms of our debt service rate. If we hit above 80 cents in that non-exempt fund, any project would have to go to a referendum. and that's not advantageous to the school districts, not advantageous to the school community as well. So that's for the total $113 million project. Now, we looked at another scenario. Okay, what if we scaled back? We didn't do everything that we needed to do, but we could get, let's say, 80-85% of what we want to do. There's going to be some things that we don't get done. What would that look like with 85 million? So again, same scenarios, just a different dollar figure there. The advantages and disadvantages are the same as what they were up in the blue category for 113 million. It's just a different dollar amount. So these are basically the two options that we are looking at is scenario 3 and scenario 6. Now, what you may ask, okay, what happens if the community doesn't pass a capital referendum? Well, at that point in time, we have to operate within what we have, which is $26 million. That's what we have. So we know that we can't do anything at RJ Basket minus some minor HVAC work and some roofing. We can't really do anything at the high school. Again, same thing, minus some HVAC work and some roofing, asphalt work, those sort of things. The bulk of that $26 million would be spent at Northview and Westview in terms of updates and upgrades there. We would just have to make do with the current infrastructure at RJ Basket and the high school. Right now, I will be completely blunt and honest with you guys about RJ Basket. It truly is a money pit for the district. The original 1950 structure and the annex take up a lot of our operating budget just to maintain those ends of the buildings. And it's not a fiscally smart decision to put any money into that building. And so, quite honestly, after this project, we would just be stuck with what we have at RJ Basket. And that's just the reality of it with the way the funding mechanisms work within public schools. I believe our ask for the community will be to look at one of these scenarios, scenario 3 or 6. If the community says that we're not in favor of that, then we as a district have to adjust. We have to adjust and just make do with what we do have. And from my opinion, I think the vast majority of our staff and really our community, I don't think that's what's best for our students. I think our students deserve better. I think our community deserves better. And that's why when I really took a deep dive into the facility analysis that have been going on over the last 12 to 15 years here at the district, and most recently over the last 2 to 3 years with more updated facility analysis, and talking to engineers, talking to construction managers, talking to asbestos abatement teams, etc., it's very unanimous on what we need to do, and that truly is move 6th, 7th, and 8th over to the high school, look to repurpose the gym, cafeteria, and newer addition at RJ Basket, the science and arts portion, and then demolish the annex and original 1950 structure and look at other alternatives for that facility. Beyond that would be a big savings to the school from an operations standpoint. Long term, by moving 6th, 7th, and 8th to the high school, there's some staffing savings that would happen in terms of shared staffing. And it's just overall long term, it's a better financial recommendation for the taxpayers of Mississinewa Community School. So a lot of information here, obviously. If you have questions or feedback or input, please feel free to reach out as we go through this and we kind of make a decision as an administrative team and a school board on what scenario we're going to present to the community. We will get that information out there and be very upfront and transparent with everything that we are looking at doing. Okay, so as a taxpayer, and you're going to have the question. It's a great question to have. Well, what does this mean to me for me as a taxpayer? What can I expect my tax bill to be? If the board decides to move forward with either a capital referendum and or an operating referendum, there we will have a calculator where you can plug in your specific address, and it will tell you exactly how much per dollar and cents your taxes will increase due to a referendum. These are more general numbers based upon the average home assessed value within the district. So first I want to look at the 85 million multiple issuances. And so that was looking at scenario 6 on the previous slide. So if you look at the median home value of 128,000, you scroll all the way over to the right to that 85 million multiple issuances. You have your net liability of 1758. So we know, looking at the base liability for 2025, we know that that is right here. That is actually $1,280. So because of property tax caps, that 1% property tax cap. So my home is valued at $128,000. I have to pay a maximum of $1,280. If we passed a $59 million referendum and used the $26 million of bonding capacity, what would my taxes go up? My taxes as a $128,000 property valued owner would go up $478 per year. Okay, now what if we went with the $113 million issuance of multiple scenarios? And again, that's using that $26 million of bonding capacity that we currently have and looking at an $87 million referendum. As a homeowner of a $128,000 property valued home, I would pay my maximum base on a 1% property tax cap of $1,280. My taxes would increase on an annual basis by $698, bringing my total tax bill for the year to $1,978. So again, you compare that, that's about a $200 per year difference for the average homeowner. Okay, then the question may be, okay, what about rental residence, farmland, commercial? You can see those numbers down here as well. You have about a $919 increase for those to $1,342 increase per $100,000 of assessed valuation. The advantage of doing this, again, goes to those TIF districts. The school is not receiving any levy from those TIF districts. If a referendum is passed, the TIF districts and the property tax caps are not going to be as impactful to the district, which is going to create more levy. The two scenarios that we laid out, scenario 3 and scenario 6, are the best scenarios for our tax-paying homeowners because we're able to recoup some of that levy from the TIF districts and from other industry as well that we wouldn't normally realize. And so those are important things to understand in this process and what we're factoring into this. These numbers, again, are based on only a capital referendum. As we continue to have further discussion about our deficit and our cash balance over the next several years, there would be or will be considerations for an operating referendum. That would be a separate amount. Typically, those are much, much lower than a capital referendum. Operating referendums are only good for 8 years. And so if we would choose to pursue that and the community would vote for that to be able to maintain staffing and programming for our students, that would be an 8-year operating referendum, typically at a much lower rate. You can see 5, 10, 15, 20 cents per $100 of assessed valuation. As we look through that and we continue to do further analysis, we'll have more up-to-date information for you on that as well. So this is specifically talking about a capital referendum for the district. So we have really two options we're looking at: a $113 million total project with an $87 million capital referendum, or an $85 million project with a $59 million capital referendum. And those are two different options we're looking at this point in time. So just wanted to lay that out for everybody. Again, my apologies that the recording didn't work last night. Baker Tilly, Stiefel, Ice Miller, and Policy Analytics, all them guys did a phenomenal job presenting this information to our board. We'll have future meetings with those guys included in it as well. And going forward, you're going to hear me talk a lot about this. If the school board elects to move forward with any of these projects, there will be countless communications going out, town hall type meetings, community meetings, small group meetings. I would be more than willing to come talk to anybody one-on-one, have coffee with you, talk with you through any of this information, hear any questions, concerns, or feedback, input as well. We truly, this is not a Jeremy Fuel-led project. This is not a Mississinewa Community School Board-led project. This is just a recommendation to the community on what we feel is best for our students and our community. And ultimately, it's going to come up to the community to decide what, as a Mississinewa Community School community, we feel is best for our students now and for the long-term future. Truly, we're trying to set our students up for, and our school district up for the next 40 years. That's the goal within this. And so, any questions at any point in time, if you'd like me to come speak with you, please feel free to reach out. Be more than happy to do so. Be more than happy to meet with different groups and organizations as well. I hope this information was beneficial. Presentation's nearing an hour at this point in time, so I thought I could get it done a little bit quicker, but I think I talked too much. So again, any questions, reach out. I hope that this was beneficial. And as always, guys, go Indians.